Well, good afternoon, friends. My name is Hosffman Ospino, and I am an associate professor of theology and religious education at Boston College School of Theology and Ministry. It is a pleasure to welcome you to this session in which the publications and journal come together in order to engage in dialogue precisely about what we do, publications, So we want to just walk through you this afternoon for some of us, morning for a few others, depending on where you are. We want to engage in dialogue about how some of us can actually go through the process of getting articles published in the journal on religious education, and also in the Horizons for Religious Education series that we have as part of our organization. So the format for our conversation today is very simple. First of all, it is my honor to introduce you to Dr. Joyce and Mercer, who is an associate dean of academic affairs at the Horace Bushnell Professor of Practical Theology and Pastoral Care at Yale University Divinity School. Dr. Mercer is also the chief editor of Religious Education, the REA journal. So Joyce and I are going to interview two colleagues in the REA. Joyce is going to interview Dr. Almeda Wright, who is an associate professor of religious education at Yale Divinity School. And they will be talking about the process of publishing in the journal. Then I will proceed to, I think that we're going to go first with Patrick. So Dr. Patrick Manning, who is an associate professor of pastoral theology and chair of the Department of Pastoral Theology at Immaculate Conception Seminary School of Theology, Seton Hall University. And I will be asking a few questions, engaging in conversation with Dr. Manning on how he got his book published in the Horizons for Religious Education series. So Joyce, how do we want to go first? You want to go first? You want me to go first with Pat?
Why don't you and Pat take it away?
Well, let's do this, okay? So again, it is a conversation, open conversation. I have three questions for Pat, and then what we will do is we'll stop, and then if anyone else has a question or a comment, on the experience of publishing with the Horizons for Religious Education series, then we'll engage in dialogue. Then Joyce will engage in dialogue with Almeda, and same dynamic, we'll open it up for conversation. So Pat, thank you very much for, again, for agreeing to be part of this conversation. And we're very excited about your book, published in 2020, Converting the Imagination, teaching to recover Jesus's vision for fullness of life. It's a fascinating title. And it's also one of the books, that is selling quite well, as part of the series. And we know that you have been, hard at work promoting it in your classes and with others, friends, colleagues, and so on. So I have three questions for you, Pat. And so let's begin, with the first one. Now, when did you know that you had a book that would be fitting in the Horizon series? And what steps did you take to move it from dissertation to book manuscript?
Yeah. First of all, let me just say thanks so much for the invitation. Hosffman, always good to be talking with you, and just good to be here with so many good folks. Yeah. So as Hosffman said, this book came out of my dissertation. I had written a dissertation that I called "In the Images of God," and so it was a dissertation about the importance, the role of images in the imagination in religious education. And so after I'd finished the dissertation and secured a job and was thinking about a book, that it was moving in a new direction. There were developments in that I was really thinking more and more about religious education as assisting learners in the work of making meaning. And so if folks here were in the workshop yesterday with Josh and Dory, some of the things that they touched upon, just recognizing the kind of meaning crisis that we're experiencing in society and all that comes with that in terms of the challenges for mental health. This was all in the backdrop for me. These were things that I was engaging with and wanted to speak more to that as I was moving the dissertation into a book. And so really from early on, I had a sense that there was a good chance this is something that might be a fit for the Horizon series. It was, it's very solidly within the field of religious education, and it sort of fit the description in terms of I had a dissertation that was ready to move into book format. And so I think the things really started moving when I was at one of these REA conferences, and I think I was doing a poster presentation that particular year, and Jack Seymour, who's in the crowd here, was there in the audience, and so we were chatting, and eventually we started talking about the book. I was aware of the book series from being involved at the conferences, and he was very encouraging based on what I was telling him about what I was working on, and he said, yeah, let's continue the conversation, and we can start thinking about a proposal. And so at that point I made the decision that I did think that Horizons was going to be the right place for it. That was sort of a discernment process, because it's, you could go different directions depending on what you were looking for. That obviously, as someone who was starting out my career, there was a thought of, well, should I be trying to get published in a university press, something that might be more prestigious or look better on a resume. So I was thinking about all these different things, but in the end, I really felt like publishing through Horizons was going to be the best fit. And really the important things for me were, I knew from talking to Jack and talking to others that that this was going to be a process of not just getting a book out, but that I was going to receive some really valuable mentoring through this. That's something that was really appealing to me, that not only did I have the benefit of working closely with Jack and ongoing conversations with him, but as part of the process, he would work to pair me up with someone else who would be very involved in reading the book and helping to develop it. And so eventually Bud Harrell, who's also here, was generously gave his time to this project. And so I was really excited about that aspect. So for me as a young scholar, sort of starting out in my professional career, I just had a sense that this was going to be the most important thing for me. Besides just getting a book out, I wanted to be working with people, who could really be educating me about the writing and publishing process, who would really help me to form my thought and to develop the ideas in the book, in addition to just sort of, editing for publication. And I just knew it was going to be a great opportunity, because this, the folks here in this virtual space, this was the audience for my book. I wanted to be reaching scholars of religious education, but also practitioners. And so there was just no better fit than Horizons in terms of reaching those kind of folks. So I sort of discerned that this is where I wanted to do. Jack sort of guided me even through the shaping of the proposal. Again, sort of a difference between publishing with another publishing house, that I didn't have to just put together a proposal and send it off and hope for the best. But even in the early stages, Jack was working with me to prepare the proposal and get that into good shape, so that it would have a good chance of being accepted. And so I think I had finally submitted the proposal early in 2017, after having talked with him about it in the previous fall. Eventually, it was accepted. I was paired up with Bud a couple of months later, And then later on in the process, Hosffman and Mayan as editors in the series would also be looking at the manuscript and giving me feedback. So does that kind of get at what you were asking about, Hosffman?
Absolutely, Pat. And actually, two things that I want to highlight from what you just shared. One, the profound sense of community of scholars that the series provides, you know. And I think that this is for those of you who might be considering submitting a proposal to Horizons, you know. So something that I find fascinating about this, and I actually appreciate the vision, you know, of Dean Blevins and others who were part of this series at the beginning, you know, is to imagine how we as religious education scholars who understand the field, who have a passion for the field, can support one another in doing this. So that's that's something that, you know, is important, you know, and it's good to know that we are in a familia, you know, in a family of scholars that understand each other and support each other. The other point that, you know, that I also wanna that I wanna highlight is that in the process of discernment, you know, when somebody submits a proposal to the series, well, not all proposals are fitting, you know, exactly for the series, you know, and it's important. It's key to know that. So, but we don't leave you hanging out there with your proposal, and this is something that the co-editorial team does. You know, we look at the proposals and we say, this is perfectly a fitting job or manuscript for the series. Or sometimes we say, why don't you take this maybe to a publisher that focuses more on education, or focuses more on theology, or focuses more on history, depending on the orientation of the manuscript, you know. But we will help you. We'll walk with you through the entire process. So most people do not receive an outright no, this does not fit, and good luck. You know, we work with you and we journey with you. The second question, Pat, you know, okay, you submitted this proposal, you know, it was accepted, you know, and then what would you say were the major adjustments that you made to move the dissertation from dissertation to manuscript? And how did the Horizon Series editorial team help you to navigate the process?
Yeah, I mean, in the end, it was almost an entirely new book. And that was partly because of the guidance of the editorial team, but also partly just because since I had defended my dissertation, my thought had just continued to evolve, and my understanding of the context had evolved. And so it morphed into something that was quite different. So one big difference is that I had to cut a lot of material. I think I probably cut more than half in terms of the word count for my dissertation, while at the same time really incorporating a lot of new ideas, new research. So you know, I mentioned audience before. That was really a key piece of guidance that I've received from Jack and the editorial team all the way, is to really keep me laser focused on my audience. So again, you know, who you know, REA, it's, you know, we're talking scholars of religious ed, we're talking about practitioners. You know, so this is something that might be able to be used in courses, but also by people who are working in the field. So I had to kind of shift my language and my orientation, knowing that I'm not preparing this for a dissertation committee. This is for scholars. This is for practitioners, and so that just meant sort of a different style and tone. I incorporated more anecdotes, more practical examples in the book as it was moving towards book form. There was also, as Hosffman was talking about, you know, this is sort of the work of a community, and I was involved in a community of scholarship in doing this, and that was another thing that the editorial team really emphasized, was really engaging the field of religious education, and so that was certainly there in my dissertation, but they really pushed me to do that even more, to be in conversation with other authors in the Horizon series, to be in conversation with authors from the religious education journal and just the field more broadly. Because I find this so helpful because this is a book for this particular group of people. You know, that it helps to bring our work together, that we're not just, you know, throwing our scholarship out there, but we're really talking to one another, that we're really building on each other's work. So it's in terms of sort of the process for this and how I was being helped along. As I would finish a chapter, rewrite a chapter, I would send it to both Jack and Bud. So they were reading all along with me, giving very substantive feedback, reading very closely. Hosffman and Mayan would receive the manuscript when it was basically nearing completion, and they offered feedback as well. You know, I'd say that Bud offered really one of his great contributions. He just offered very helpful challenges to sort of my assumptions, you know, the things that I wasn't necessarily seeing or thinking about, highlighted things that, well, you might want to be engaging this scholar, or you might want to be thinking about this other area of the scholarship. So again, I mean, the book is just so much, it's so much better than it could have been if I had been writing this in isolation. Maybe one final point would be that another part of the process was that Jack had recommended using an independent editor, as I think he does for numerous books, or for different books going through the Horizon series. And so I did. With his help, I identified another editor who's familiar with sort of theological writing, and made sort of more selective use of her, just to look at things like the readability of the text and the organization of my ideas and that sort of thing.
Thank you, Pat. And something that is key to the process of the Horizon series is that accompaniment, you know, that a close mentor provides, you know. And I mean, we call it a senior mentor, but since our organization is so young, you know, you can be a senior 5 years into belonging to the organization very quickly. But in this particular case is Bud, you know, and I mean, we did not rehearse this, but Bud, I'm gonna put you a little bit on the spot if you don't mind, you know. Can you share a little bit about your experience accompanying Pat in the process?
Well, I guess my first experience was when I was asked and I talked with Pat about the work. I could see the potential even before I got the manuscript, and to see the contribution that it could make. And after I read the manuscript, I was convinced that this was going to be a worthwhile book and an important and valuable book. And indeed, it's a book I now use in one of my courses. What struck me about the book was the various ways, or the various streams of insight that Patrick brought together. There's a core of practical insight from his own experience as a teacher that runs throughout the book and gives it a kind of coherence. Then that was informed by a solid understanding of both religious education and educational theory. Perhaps when he began leaning a little bit more on some key work in education, more than work in religious education. So one of the things I did was to try to think of religious educators who would be good conversation partners for the educators he used, and recommending those to him. And I think that helped the book as well. And then also there was a philosophical sort of background to the book that was basically looking at the shifts in contemporary culture, and particularly how those affected the way that young people looked at the world, how the young people make meaning today in a global, multi-religious, fast-paced culture, and how the way we educate needed to take those cultural realities into account. So looking at those, the sort of the Pat's practical experience as an educator as the guiding thread, The informing and developing his own insights with religious education and educational theory, and then refining that with an understanding of the differences, the way that young people learn today, were, and bringing these threads together into coherent whole is, I think, what I tried to do, and commenting on gave Patrick suggestions on how to do that in revising the manuscript for the publication.
Thank you very much, Bud. Okay, and I got one last question, Pat. So now that, okay, you completed the manuscript, it went through the copy editor, you have everything ready, it was approved by the co-editorial team. Now it's time to take the book to the publisher, no? And for if you don't remember, this series is published with Whip Stock. So what happened then? Once you began working with the folks from the publishing company, and you just walk us through the process that you followed, Pat.
Yeah, so doing this through Horizons and working with Jack made this part of it very easy and not intimidating. So because we've been publishing the series through Whip Stock, Jack already has the context there. So when the time comes, he put me in touch with the editor at Whip Stock, makes the initial introductions, and then I begin to work with them. And Jack continues to be involved in that conversation as was necessary, which again I really benefited, because there was at one point there was a little bit of a hold up on the publisher side, and Jack was able to kind of jump in and give a little nudge with a little more heft than I was able to, and so it was helpful to be going through that process with him. Right, so we hand the manuscript over to Whip Stock. I sign a contract with them, which again is at this point fairly standard with all the Horizons authors. Whip Stock provides a guide for authors, so it's sort of a style guide, what they expect in terms of how to format the notes, abbreviations, and all that sort of thing. And I had that from the very beginning, so that I was able to try and write the text with all those guidelines in mind, rather than having to go back and redo things at a later stage. So by the time that I handed it over to Whip Stock, at that point they weren't really recommending significant revisions. The book had already been thoroughly reviewed. We'd had a number of eyes on it. And Jack and the editorial team are sort of, giving their endorsement. This book is in good shape. So when it goes to the publisher, at that point, it's really more minor editorial work. So we have some conversations, some back and forth about editing. We move eventually to the final proofs, which I reviewed. In terms of like the cover design, Whip Stock were open to my kind of suggestions. I had really liked actually the cover of Courtney Godot's book in the Horizon series, and so I said, something like that, something kind of dynamic and maybe a little bit abstract. So, and I told them, this is the gist, this is what the book is about, if you can capture that somehow. But I didn't have a strong preference. There wasn't a particular piece of artwork that I wanted to use. So their design people came up with the image and shared that with me, and I was fine with that. And so and that's how we ended up with the cover. So then, the book's ready to go. Even before it reaches the publication date, they ask for the authors to help with the work of marketing. So we do that in a number of different ways. Whip Stock asks for example, if you can generate some email lists. So, who are teachers who are likely to adopt this book for their courses? Just more generally, who are people who might be interested in this book that the publisher could notify? Who are some journals who might be interested in doing a review of the book? So I provided that sort of information. and just some, some general write-ups and blurbs and things like that they could use in other kind of press and marketing materials. Submitted a list of people who might be willing to endorse the book. So, I gave them a bunch of things for them to work with, but is going through Within Stock, a lot of the marketing work is kind of on you as the author. And then obviously, the benefit of working through Horizons is, mine is now one book in this series. And so whenever people are looking at the Horizon series, they might go to look for, for Courtney's book, for example, and they see mine along the way. But I also, to kind of help my own case, I saw Almeda earlier put the link for my website in the chat. Thank you very much. So I did create a website to kind of help publicize the book, and also just to provide some digital resources to readers and teachers and people who might be interested that way. So yeah, so I think it gives you a sense of all the things we did in terms of getting ready for publication and then beginning to market the book.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Pat. I think that this gives us, this is a brief conversation. Thanks for your generosity sharing these details, because it gives us all a sense of, one, the complexity of the process of getting a book from dissertation to a book, yet how that complexity is ameliorated by the fact that there's a community supporting, our authors.
Yep, absolutely.
And two, I think that we just want to encourage any of our members who are particularly at the beginning of their careers to consider submitting a proposal to Horizons. So before I hand it over to Joyce for a conversation with Almeda, I would like to see if anybody has a question regarding the series, or maybe about the process as explained by Pat. Oh, Bud.
Hosffman, could you tell us what's coming up in the series Horizons in Religious Ed? Like what's on the horizons for Horizons?
What's in the horizons for Horizons? Well, first of all, we have published, we got 7 books out, in the series, which is an amazing accomplishment. The series is only 10 years old, or at least the idea of the series. The first book was published in 2014. And we have seven books. We would hope to have a few more. There are 2 more books that are coming up. Most likely towards the end of this year. I mean, they will likely be finished between this summer and early the fall of this year. And one of the books is being written by Elena Soto. And she's doing some work on Parker Palmer, and the connection to religious education, in light of also her dissertation work. And also we have the work of Hee-Sung Hwang, who is also working on 2nd generation Korean American children. So those are the 2 books that are coming for, in the horizons within the next year, I would say, or so, depending on how fast we move with the final details and then eventually production. We have a number of also manuscripts that have been submitted, and are currently under review. But again, there aren't that many. We got 2 manuscripts that are under review. We would love to have at least 4 or 5 more. So I remember that in conversation with Jack, our dream is to have at least 1 or 2 of these books being, coming out of the series or as part of the series every year. But so far we're doing well. We're publishing 1 per year or so, and that's solid. These are books that are asking new questions, taking us into different levels. Just as Pat's book on the imagination. Thank you. Any other questions? Very good. I mean, we're going to continue this conversation. So why don't we have Joyce engage in conversation with Almeda, and then towards the end we'll just bring all these questions and thoughts comments that we may have. And I would love to also hear from Jack, in your experience, since you've been involved with both Horizons and the journal. So Joyce, please.
Thank you so much. So Dr. Wright, let's just start right in. And we are talking about the Religious Education Journal as a site of publication. And you know, of course, that we publish, in addition to the conference issue of the journal, in which we have a committee that juries the presentation manuscripts that people revise after the conference. We also have 4 other issues during the year. And so in religious education, there are lots and lots of opportunities beyond just the conference papers when people can publish their work. So to get a picture of what it looks like to go through that, why don't we start by hearing a little from you, if you can tell us how you got your idea for your article, and tell us a little bit about your writing process.
So thank you again to Hosffman and to Joyce for convening this conversation, and to Patrick for sharing so much about his. It's been a great conversation so far. But to think about my own work, or to think about how I began to write actually a couple of articles for religious education, but the one I'm going to talk about mostly is my one on miseducation, a recurring theme. So the article that I published in Religious Education actually started as part of a longer term research project, as most good articles probably do. And it was a research project on religious and theological education among African Americans that is still, it's a conversation that I'm having probably all my life. But at the time I was teaching in the greater Charlotte area, and I was in conversation with a lot of new pastors and new seminary graduates who were not sure what to make of their experiences with theological education and what they had just learned, and kind of what they were doing once they were in the trenches. And so the research started, like most of my research as a practical theologian, in conversation with communities of practitioners. And so I want to name that, but the conversations also evolved, and my writing process had to evolve a little bit. So I started doing some preliminary surveys, and I put out an email and Facebook post the way we normally do our convenient samples, to just begin to have a broader set of conversations, and to begin to collect more systematic data out of which I could create something to analyze and tease it out. And so for me, when I'm thinking about a journal article, or when I'm thinking about my writing process, typically I'm looking at my big questions. I'm looking at like the full arc of my research agenda, or my kind of like body of work, and what piece an article might be, or what piece I can tease out, or want to be in conversation, or to do a little bit more of a deeper dive, if you will. And so the article for me, or any journal article, typically is an opportunity or an invitation, I see, and to take a deeper dive into my research, to take a deeper dive in a particular way. And so for me, also, interestingly, I was also on the job market when I first started doing this. And so the first iteration of the article was a job talk. It was actually my Yale Divinity School job talk. And so I was happily presenting narratives and, if you will, work in progress, where I was thinking through new and big questions, but also in a very kind of focused and narrow way. And I think, so for me, I am the one who often starts the first draft of a journal article in a presentation, or in some type of public forum, so that I'm not writing in a silo. But I think if I can add a little bit more about that, I think also it grew. So turning it though from a job talk into a publication or a journal article is a much different process. So those are different audiences, different motivations, different skill sets. But in some ways, there are some parallels that are helpful for me. And so often when I'm thinking about my writing process and also my presenting process, the things that make for a good presentation are often the things that also make for a good article. And for me in particular, paying attention to audience, paying attention to transition and flow, paying attention to overall structure so that there's some coherence to the narrative. So even though it's a smaller, more focused thing, it has to flow. And it has to have some connective tissue that if it's going to hold together for a reader, for a hearer, it will also probably hold together for a reader. And so those are things that I think about starting there.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I'm thinking about one of our living ancestors, Chuck Foster, who used to say, if you can figure out how to use something for more than one thing, that's a real good approach. And I think that's right, because even though we're only going to publish, you can't publish the same article in more than one place unless you really have some kind of weird special permissions or something like that. In our journal, we publish original articles. We expect that, and you sign off saying that you haven't published it somewhere else. But to use it as a job talk, as a presentation, as a something you do in a classroom, to get multiple uses, not only I think helps the writing in just the way you've named, but also enlivens it, because then you're in more conversations with more people about the ideas that you're trying to put forward in the journal article. So that's great. Thanks for telling us a little about that. You mentioned audience, and I wonder if, before I move to another question, if you could say a little bit more about how you targeted the audience that is for the Religious Education Journal in that specific part of your writing.
So in this particular article, I think broadly about the Guild, the scholarly Guild, of who are parts of the conversation in religious education and who are, say, for example, membership of REA. But I also think more broadly in terms of my audience, and this particular one was also both scholars in professional, religious educators, but also partly, I always feel committed to speak back to the community that I am researching. So those seminarians and recent theological graduates were also part of the audience. So the writing is not as clear as if I were writing a blog, or as pointed as if I'm giving practical wisdom, but I also am always thinking about my accountability of, can I share this? Should I share this? Can I teach this to my seminarians and not just have it be something that only my colleagues in professional, societies could read? And so in writing this one, I knew that I wanted to write it in such a way that it would draw in and expand a conversation that I thought that we had not had very well, actually, in religious education in the journal. And so to push it a little bit, because when I was doing the research, I recognized up at that point, it was also, this article was part of a special issue on race and racism and religious education. And that was actually the first such issue that we had since probably, I think, so that was in 2015, and we hadn't had a similar one or even an article on race and racism since 2003. And that was part of another invited series on the null curriculum. Mm-hmm. Not that individual scholars hadn't been writing about these things, but there was an opportunity in this issue and in this article to really push a conversation, or to invite a conversation that we as scholars and practitioners of religious education needed to have, or to think more fully. And so when I was writing this, I was definitely thinking about, not how to pull punches, but also how do you open a conversation? Because there's a way in your writing that you can either expand a conversation or you can shut something down. And there's always, for me, wanting to write with generosity and an invitation to spark in other scholars or in other students a desire to go further. So in the article, I'm not you're not answering all the questions, but hopefully I'm raising enough good questions that other people want to do something with it.
Well, you must have done that because the article gets a lot of use. If you go on the website, you can see that it's one of the ones that gets a lot of downloads. And even, in fact, in the review stage, I think 2 of the reviewers contacted me and said, I know this is an anonymous review, but I'd love to know who this is so that I can write them and ask if I can use this in my class. before it comes out in publications. So you got that part really well. It opens some conversations. I want to say one other thing about audience before we move along, and that is that because the journal is international in our readership, and we reflect in many ways the membership of the Religious Education Association. We have people in all different kinds of work in religious education, but also we're pretty porous borders. We have folks all over the world who are reading our journal. And what that means for writers is that all of us who write for the journal have to become like visitors to our own work, so that we can see, okay, I'm using this word here because I grew up with people saying this phrase, but are people in Belgium going to know what this means? Is Barrett Robin going to be able to see this? And it's such an idiomatic expression. Will it translate into another way of, even if it's still in English? Sometimes those meanings don't carry over. And so international audience is one thing that folks have to keep in mind. And also that we publish in many, many different faith traditions, both within Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, and beyond those to other traditions and heritages. So if you're writing for an all Roman Catholic audience and you use terminology like the magisterium, you know what that is because you've been writing about that in your Catholic circles. But some of our readers are Southern Baptists and they haven't had exposure to that, or they're Hindu and they don't know what you're talking about. So this process of thinking internationally, thinking multi-religiously, thinking ecumenically within religious heritage groups is also part of considering the audience. All right. What are some of the differences that you would say you are aware of, Almeda, between writing an article for publication in religious education and writing a paper for a class or even writing a presentation?
Mm-hmm. This was actually, I appreciate this question, of course, because this did start as a job talk and there's some similarities, but there are also lots of differences. So your content is your content. However, how you present your content and how you invite people into your content is very different. A presentation often is one of the most superficial things. And if you've ever been to a good paper, you often are given just enough and left yearning for so much more that you then either email the person and ask them for, like, their citations, their footnotes, or all the other stuff that they never got to present. The journal article is an opportunity to kind of go back in. One of the things about process, though, I do like the presentation first because it raises lots of questions and it gives me, in some ways, another level of review. So what I did as I transitioned from writing to the job talk to this was that I went back to the questions where people were asking for more clarification, where people were asking, had you considered this dimension? Who are your interlocutors? And you get to play with that, like to outline that or to expand it in particular ways. Also, the journal article for me was the place where the nuance or the things that make our scholarship pop, the innovations really get teased out in some helpful ways. So for example, I might be able to say, oh, I'm talking about, I'm using a Freirean framework or I'm using a Du Boisian framework in my job talk, but in the journal article, I get to outline and maybe scaffold each of those moves so that it brings my point front and center. Or I can then kind of give you a couple of paragraphs that allows me to fully flesh out a theory that I might only mention in passing in a presentation or in a paper. Also for me though, however, the one thing that is consistent both in the presentation and in the journal article, which probably even pushes it beyond, say, maybe a seminar paper, is that there has to be a coherent arc and there has to be so you need to, they're parts of a journal article. Like you've got to hit your lit review. You've got to hit your contribution to the field. You've got to hit what is the innovation or what is what are you moving forward? What's the argument that you're advancing? And it has to be done in a very clear way so that you're not it's while it's a very open and expansive genre, there are some clear markers that we must always include in writing a journal article. Also, in terms of other differences, I think for me, part of one of the things that I really loved or appreciated about the different process, people are generally nice and in your face when when you're presenting something. Not that they're not nice when you're doing peer review, but the peer review process, also writing for the journal article, it's a double blind peer review process. So you don't know who your interlocutors are. You don't know who your reviewers are often until the process is way over. But what it also allows is for a deeper, richer conversation. I may be strange, but I think Patrick alluded to this a little bit in his process. I really enjoy the peer review process. For me, the peer review process in writing the journal article was an opportunity and an invitation for me to think, not just with new eyes, but to think in a richer way about my work, to look at something, to wrestle with, wait a minute, have you thought about this? And for example, I remember one of my reviewers of this piece, it's crazy that it still stands with me, really had reminded me that I hadn't engaged some of the ancestors in the field of religious education. And I remember thinking, oh my God, they're right. They're so right. How did I write this whole piece and not talk about Olivia Pearl Stokes? How did I write this whole piece and not talk about Grant Shockley and Ann Wimberly and Yolanda Smith and Lynn Westfield? And so it was an invitation for me, and all it took was a few, for them to ask that pointed question to jog my memory, for me to go sleuthing a little bit more into the religious education journal archives in my own library to transform the journal article in ways that I couldn't have, again, done on my own, or would not have done without that trigger. And so for me, that's also one of the more helpful parts of writing a journal article, because post-dissertation, and unless you're writing with the Horizon series, most of our writing doesn't have those layers of conversations and interlocutors. And so the peer review process invites often an opportunity for you to consider again and to just go take a deeper dive or another pass at things. And so that for me was a gift, but it's also one of the distinguishing characteristics between writing something for a presentation and writing for a journal publication.
Yeah, thank you. That's really helpful and I'm thinking about two things. One is, in a way, dissertation writing spoils us for all other kinds of writing, because you have somebody who is so committed to you and your work over a sustained period of time, and they are examining it with you and talking about it with you and critiquing you and upholding you. And then you finish it and you go off and you try to write again, and you might not ever see that kind of commitment from another person. But in our publications in this organization, we really do try to offer some accompaniment. And one way that we do that in the journal is that we don't allow nasty peer reviews. First of all, most of our reviewers come from within the organization, the Religious Education Association, but some from outside, depending on the specialty content of the issue. And if somebody's having a bad day and they use the peer review as an opportunity to zing you, we're going to help pull out the constructive critique in that and take the stinger out, because we understand that when you get peer review feedback, there is a kind of defensiveness that can be there. Authors fall in love with their words. Authors get inside their own conceptual frameworks, right? And it's hard sometimes to hear even the friendliest of critics say, this didn't really, I couldn't follow what you were doing here. And, some people respond by getting their backs up. Well, you must not be reading me closely enough. But I try to encourage authors to think about critical peer review processes as the opportunity. This is your best friend, the person who gives you that critical review, because you have an opportunity to fix something before it goes into print. And so what that means is that if there's a gaping hole or something that's a problem for one peer review, you could probably assume that they represent a bunch of other people who might read it the same way that person did. And so with that in mind, you have the opportunity to actually respond to your critic in advance. And that way, when it does go to press, it's a stronger piece. So I would just encourage you to have your little moment of defensiveness and then put that over there. It'll still be there if you need it later, but let yourself be open to the feedback that you get. And Almeda, you've given a really nice example of the way you have befriended your peer reviewers in the process, and that has made for some very strong writing that we've been able to publish. A last question before we move into more open conversation with everybody. Tell us a little bit about what you've learned over time about getting your work published in our journal or other academic journals that you didn't know when you first started out. Mm-hmm. So I'm asking you here to, kind of pass on your trade secrets of how you, the accumulated wisdom over time to people who also are hoping to get their work published.
So some of it's real basic, some of it's particular to me. So the most basic thing that I've learned over time is to actually read the journals that you want to publish in. I know it sounds like mind blown, but real basic stuff. But for me, honestly, I remember getting advice to publish here, publish there. And if they weren't journals that I was familiar with, it's so helpful to start reading, not just, recent issues, but go further back. And it's also not because we want to duplicate what's already been done. We don't want to do that. But you do want to get a sense of both the scope, the size, the terminology, the reach, the audience that journal is for. And so for me, I now, whether I'm ready to publish something or not, I'm reading journals that I could potentially be a part in. And that was just because you get a sense of the required elements, what's useful, even like their citation, because for example, I normally bury most of my argument in my footnotes, but for RE, for religious education, we don't do extensive footnotes, and that's very helpful. Also, it forces me to write better, but it's also I love, but there's a way that just reading the journal helped me to kind of see, oh, this is the range, this is the scope, these are the kinds of conversations that we're starting here, and that was really important. Also, it was, reading articles also helped me to get a better sense of what can be done in 30 to 40, manuscript pages. And because sometimes the hardest thing to figure out is how much is enough versus too little or too much in terms of advancing your argument. And so, because it was real clear that an article is not a dissertation or a book, but you have to present this clear and cogent argument that advances the conversation in the field of religious educators. The other thing, kind of like tricks of the trade for me, was around honoring my commitments. One of my commitments that peer reviewer really helped me to solidify and to kind of reiterate was my commitment to citing Black women and my commitment to citing Indigenous, people of color scholars, and to citing religious educators. And that was the other thing that is so important. Oftentimes our work, we're in conversation with so many different cognate disciplines, and that's important, like psychologists and ethnographers and sociologists and political theorists. I do all of that. But reading the journal, citing the journal, citing other religious educators also helped me to expand and target and know what and how, where I fit in the field and how I wanted to position my work to continue the legacy of the field. So I don't want there to be, people say, well, she's the only one writing about this. No, there's a whole lot of folks who've been writing about this before. I need you to read them, so I need to cite them. And so there's a way that all of that was carrying through. It's not just for, hits and numbers on articles, even though that's good for a journal. For me, it was a political and almost spiritual commitment to citing these people's works. And it's also kind of my way of hoping that someone will cite my work and to continue this full circle here. I think the other thing that we've kind of hit on a little bit was my final point about tricks of the trade is really to make sure that even before you submit, to have some conversation partners, have a way of getting your work vetted. The peer review process will be part of that, but it will go so much smoother if you've presented it at a conference, if you have a writing group or writing partner that you trust to read it. Part of that for me was also flexing my muscle. Like Joyce was right. We do hold our words close. Like, I love all my words. I love all my ideas, but already being in conversation with some people helps me to know how to handle like critique, or know how to take what is constructive and advance and improve the work versus, just fixate on the fact, well, they said I didn't write, and whatever the critique might be, that we will fixate on that particular day. And so for me, it's just been, getting in the habit of reading folks' works and having folks read my work that really helped me in the whole peer review and journal writing process.
Thank you. It's reminding me of how important it is to leave time to share your work with people as part of your writing process. Right? A lot of us think, okay, my deadline is May the 5th, so I can write up to May the 5th, and then you don't have time to let anybody else look at your work and vet it for you or help you think about it a little bit differently. So encourage people to include that. Another thing that you said, Almeda, that I was appreciating is what it means to actually cite people in the field and to cite the literature of the field. One of the criterion for deciding whether or not an article will be published in our journal is, does it advance the field? Does it in some way do service to our field that moves it along in a direction? Is it building on the work that has gone before and then pushing us a little bit more in whatever your topic is? And the only way we know that collectively is if you say whose shoulders you're standing on, because all of us are standing on lots of other people's shoulders. We did not get here ex nihilo. All of us have ancestors. We stand on their shoulders. They hold us up. And some of them are living and some of them are in the communion of saints, for those who are Christians here, where we stand on their shoulders. And every time we publish something, having that awareness of that helps to make visible how we are advancing the field with our own work in the new publication. So thank you for bringing both of those things up. One quick commercial before we move into more discussion is that we are in our 117th year of publication of the journal. So we have a long and storied career doing this journal together. And we have a couple of special opportunities coming up. One is that in 2023, there will be a special issue. We've invited a number of people to write for thinking about administration as religious education. So a number of people are going to be writing and thinking about that with us. And if you have contributions you want to make around that, well, put in an article. That would be a great one. Yeah, I'll turn it back over to you, Hosffman, and thank you all for listening to this conversation with Almeda. Appreciate, Almeda, everything that you've contributed to us.
Thank you very much, Joyce and Almeda. That's fabulous. And more advice, more wisdom, that we receive from our authors and from the different editorial teams. If I can interject something, kind of taking advantage of my role as facilitator here. I remember the first time I published in the journal, Religious Education, and Jack was, back then, was the editor. And I remember that when I had recently finished my doctoral studies, I was concerned because I wanted to write a big monograph right at the outset, and it's, and at some points, you get anxious when you don't have the monograph, when you don't have the 200 or 300 pages that you want to write. But all of a sudden you realize that actually you got the 30 pages for an article, and start with the low-hanging fruit, and start with these great ideas. I think Almeda got it absolutely right. There are some passions that we all have. There are ideas that, essays and pieces in which we are not going to say everything, but we'll get the ball rolling. We'll get some conversations and so on. And then we all define our own styles. There are colleagues in the REA who are really good at publishing the long monographs. There are colleagues in the REA who do significant work with social science. They write reports, they do some of the work that is associated with this type of literature and so on. And that's welcome as part of our publications. And there are others who, are more comfortable with, writing these essays in which, they get published in the journal. You become part of a larger conversation. So finding our sweet spot, finding that place where we are comfortable in sharing, scholarship is key for the process of publication. So, okay, you have heard from Almeda, from Patrick, Joyce and I have interjected some wisdom as we sit behind the scenes, with their editorial teams and so on. I just want to express my gratitude to all our colleagues, on the Religious Education Journal editorial board, and the many people who review these articles and submissions, who support, who provide the vision. I also want to express my gratitude to the co-editorial team of the Horizon series, Mayanne Tran, Elizabeth Condi-Frazier, Jack Seymour, and I, a team of 4, work together alongside an editorial board, So there are armies of people behind these journals and these publication opportunities to support us all. So let me open it up to conversation. It could be questions, but it could also be comments, some insights that you have learned about the process of working either with the journal or the Horizon series.
Hosffman, I have a question. This is Mark Hearn. 2 questions. One is, I know that the Horizon, I really appreciate this, that the Horizon series is focused on newer, junior, younger scholars, or scholars who haven't had an opportunity as much to be able to publish. Is that still kind of the focus? So that's my first question. The other question is, I think I've seen a shift in publishing, especially towards books, towards like, do you have an idea, a concept, to now actually submitting full manuscripts? So is the Horizon series still able, or if we have a half-baked idea, where do we go with this idea with series so that we wonder, is it really worth the time even? Is this even in the ballpark that we should put our time into actually writing a full manuscript? And as well as the collegiality piece, where I would want ideas even before I put together the manuscript to say, how should I even shape the manuscript? And maybe that's the paper route initially. Sure. But so those 2 questions.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mark, for your questions. In terms of the first one, what's the focus right now in terms of the type of authors we want to encourage to submit manuscripts to the series? We are focusing on early career scholars, and the idea is to, in a sense, support those scholars who have an excellent dissertation, who have a strong manuscript, to take it to the next level. For many reasons, we know that sometimes many of us in our institutions are the only person teaching religious education on a particular faculty, or there are maybe 2 people who are doing there, but these are scholars who also have administrative responsibilities, because it is the nature of the type of work that we do. So in a sense, we want to make sure that those who are in their early careers are able to submit a manuscript, and we will bring this particular support. Some of us may be more on the senior side of our careers. Maybe we have already published and so on, So the series, as far as I remember, and Jack, you can correct me if I misrepresent the vision of the series, no? There are some senior colleagues who have approached us and say, hey, I got a manuscript that maybe could be part of the series, and it could be an edited collection and so on. And our preference at this particular moment is to say, if there is a senior scholar who has an idea, an edited collection and so on, we would be happy to consider it as long as the contributors, or at least half or more of the contributors, are early career scholars. Again, the emphasis continues to be on early career scholars. Am I correct, Jack? Perfect. And in terms of the second question, manuscripts or ideas, that's the holy grail question. But actually, it has a simple answer, and it's manuscripts. Okay, so the series, we would consider, for instance, if you have, for instance, a draft of a manuscript, or you got a dissertation that you have been working on, and then you have an idea as to how to turn it into a book, the editorial team will work with you on that idea, and as Pat said, you may end up actually with a new book, or you may end up with an entirely revised dissertation. And but for instance, if all you have is an idea, and then you say, will the Horizon series, Horizon series accept my idea, and then I'll work on it for the next 2 or 3 years? So far, that's not the practice that we have. What we are receiving at this point is manuscripts, beginning with dissertations, or if you have worked on another manuscript, you already revised your dissertation, and you have something concrete, specific, we will be happy to review it. It is the practice or a policy of the Horizon series at this point that we will receive full manuscripts, not just 1 chapter or 2 chapters. We'll review full manuscripts, because that will allow us to move the process forward and bring all the energy into completed manuscripts. Of course, they may change, they may evolve, but at least you already have a strong beginning. Thank you, Mark, for the questions. April. I see your hand, Dr. April Jackson.
Yes, hi. I have a question about taking a dissertation to the next level. You talked about people who are like early career scholars, and I heard Pat mention like the evolution of ideas after the dissertation. So I completed the dissertation, but a lot of my ideas have evolved and expanded. So where do I start if I would like to publish?
Well, send us the dissertation. That's the best way, send us the dissertation, and on the website, on the REA website, there's a page for the Horizon series. So all you have to do is, there's a series of guidelines for the submission. Send us the dissertation, and in the proposal, then let us know how you hope to take the dissertation to the next level. Maybe you already moved on from half of the dissertation. You think that half of the dissertation is not going to be part of your new book project. Write that down as part of the proposal, and then we will be able to start a conversation back and forth. Sometimes that conversation is via email, sometimes the conversation is via Zoom, but we promise one thing: we will engage you in conversation, April.
Okay, thank you. And my second question is to Dr. Almeda Wright. I just wanted to thank you for and Mary Elizabeth Moore for Children, Youth, and Spirituality in a Troubling World. When I was at Claremont School of Theology, I ate that book for breakfast, and I was wondering if I could have a conversation with you, Dr. Almeda Wright.
Definitely send me an email. Of course, we can drop that in the chat, but thank you. Also, I appreciate anyone, by the way, who reads any book, particularly one like that one, because most of us, that was a book that, again, was a conversation. It predates the Horizon series, but it was in the spirit of the Horizon series of Dr. Mary Elizabeth Moore pulling together junior scholars. I think I was probably a third year doctoral student to help co-edit and to convene this conversation of religious education scholars and practical theologians.
So specifically, just what I want to say is, like I said, I ate that book for breakfast with being Cheryl Kajawa Holbrook, like pushing it, you know. And what I wanted to ask you is, I also write short stories, just kind of like as a different type of writing, because I think the lady said it earlier. She was talking about how the dissertation kind of messes up. I like to write like a lot of Afro futuristic kind of stuff, but my passion is for African American youth, hip hop, and children. And so I was wondering, like, would I be able to have a conversation with you around that, around unchurched youth?
Yes, definitely. That would be a lovely conversation for us to have offline. I've dropped my email address, almeda.wright@yale.edu in the chat, so you can feel free to reach out. Also, just to advance the conversation, to read more in the journal, because I'm thinking about Karen Mosby. Karen Mosby has an amazing set of articles in the Religious Education Journal where she's already teasing out some of the ways that RE and, say, Chance the Rapper's coloring book, excuse me, I'm messing up the name, I can't think today, really kind of moves in a particular way. So there's places and conversations that are already happening within our field and in our guild to kind of help, I think, inspire you, Dr. April, and to kind of help you further in this conversation. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Other thoughts, friends?
I ask a question to Almeda too. So Almeda, those of us who are from like a global majority of BIPOC communities, because we are committed to justice of all people by making our community's issue more visible. And so we tend to write about our people, especially like racial justice. But also in very white guild, sometimes we tend to be ghettoized as if we only do that thing, like a race thing or womanist, that Asian American thing, where in my earlier career, I was just ghettoized. Oh, she does that post-colonial thing, as if that's the only thing I do. So how do you walk the fine line that that you contribute to expanding our guild's work, and yet committed to the justice that work we do, and not being ghettoized?
Mm-hmm. Whoa, okay. Thank you, Dean Lee, for that amazing question. And of course, part of my initial cheeky response is, I don't care. But that's not the truth. The truth of the matter is that there is always a risk when we are committed to our communities of us getting ghettoized or pigeonholed in a particular way for our commitments. Part of it for me, though, is that I name explicitly both in my work. Part of one of the things that I've been pushed to do, thank you, Joyce, and other editorial teams, but also to think about how the particular becomes universal, or how the particular can be. There's a way that my attention to my community and to other communities of color and to different perspectives is an invitation to others to also kind of do that very particular work that then has connections to and universalizing themes. And that's not that I write to the lowest common denominator, because I do not, or that there's a way that I'm trying to like theorize for everybody. I don't essentialize in that particular way either, but there's a way that I try, partly both in my methodology as a religious educator, but who's also very much committed to practical theological and ethnographic methods, to write in such a way that honors the stories and the narratives of people. And that methodology speaks to and is a way that I think an invitation to a lot of different people. I didn't know, that we were charting something new when I was doing my dissertation. And I remember I was talking to I think Emmanuel Arte then. He's like, no, Almeda, you're the first dissertation, even at Emory, to explicitly say that you're using a practical theological methodology. And I was like, what are you talking about? And what he was meaning is that I put that in the title. And a lot of people had been doing it, but they hadn't put it in the title. And putting it in the title is also an invitation to say, let's think about the ways that we're approaching a conversation so that we can make it explicit. So a lot of my work, while my community is front and center, my commitment to justice is front and center, some of the ways that I connect are also with these kind of methodological connections, or with these kind of thinking about and citing of other people in the field connections. And for me, I think some of it is political savvy, that we know that in order for me to be able to continue to advocate and advance the causes of my people, I got to stay in the game. But some of it is also an actual genuine commitment to the conversation, a genuine commitment to the fact. And I remember, I think it was Patrick Reyes in his book, or his early book, where he was like, a religious educator saved my life. And so there's this idea that I'm committed to the work that's going on here because of the transformative power that it's had in my formation and in my career. So I want the conversation to continue. I hope that helps. Thank you for that question, Dr. Lee.
Well, this has been an amazing conversation, and I am mindful that in 13 minutes we're going to start a new session. So I want to give people enough time to transition and so on. So please join me in thanking Almeda, Pat, for their wisdom, and Joyce, thank you also for facilitating the conversation as well. Thank you all for your commitment to supporting the publications of the REA. And let me also do a little bit of an advertisement here. If you are interested in serving as an editor or as a reviewer or participating in a more proactive way, do not hesitate to contact Joyce or myself, or anyone on these editorial teams, because we need more voices, more eyes, more hands engaged in these processes as part of this community of learning. So great, it was a great pleasure to be with all of you. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to seeing you in the next sessions throughout the week. Many blessings.
Thank you, Hosffman.